Hi, happy Friday, good people. Um, I have been going along and I am in the middle of the copper shield shape here. I've got three of them now, and then I'll have the lattice pattern and then another copper shield. So we're on the lower half of the robe, and it's pretty encouraging to have it go so fast because I've been having help with a few apprentices. So I'm really fortunate to have that help, and and it's encouraging to see it go so fast. Well, if you've never joined me before, welcome. I try to have a couple of broadcasts per week, and that I demonstrate the weave of the Naheen, which is commonly called the Chilkat weave, and then I also weave the Raven's Tail, which in the past has been called the Northern Geometric Weaving, because all world cultures around our globe have their way of weaving and include geometric designs. But our designs come from our way of being and our culture and our unique environment. And in the past, we have used mountain goat, and we used to trade that as almost like a currency along our coast. So the mountain goat garments and the mountain goat woven things, and even just the raw roving, the raw bit of the mountain goat fiber is traded. And then when the fur traders came, they came with their bolts of fabric. The people immediately recognized that that would be a good thing to have, was the fabric that they brought. And they also brought the Hudson Bay blankets, and those the blanket material started becoming a substitute for our indigenous woven wool robes. And so that became a currency along our coast, is the the blanket material that came with the trade. So then, so barter was a big part of our world economics, not just our local economics. At that time, in the late 1700s, barter was still what people did to get what they wanted. And the Hudson Bay people accommodated bartering and had many things to barter with when they came. So the economics was trade and barter, and we were very much active in that and affected world trade with our sea otters. We get the Chinese lacquered things, trunks, and beautiful lacquered material back then was a big amount of the things that they brought to Europe and to the Americas. And the porcelain, that the English porcelain is now known so well. Well, it started with the Chinese porcelain that came with the trade of the sea otter trade. So it affected the world trade. Our little corner of the world affected quite a lot of the economics of the world at that time. We really were people who were used to trading with our neighbors along the coast, and so we demanded things that were of value because we valued what we were presenting. And one of the things that the people did not want, the Europeans didn't care to have our most valuable clothing and products, and that was for us the woven apparel that was so important to us, the mountain goat woven apparel, and that is why our art came down the ages is because our chief's robes, the style was the nahin and the now what we call the raven's tail, the cloaks of the sea otter, and so off went the sea otter, and so for our ceremonies, the mountain goat clothing maintained its prestige and its power. And yes, the Hudson Bay people came with their blankets, but the chiefs maintained and knew the worth of the women's textiles and their skills. And so the people adopted the blanket material and then they made it into ceremonial material by putting designs on it. And but the chiefs, the head chiefs, still always valued their mountain goat garments, and they weren't taken off their shoulders to get onto the shoulders of tsars and mandarins of the Chinese and Russian people, and the European demand for furs too. So anyway, we did good with that trade, but the economy changed. Economic bartering was gradually stopped being the way people maintained their economy, and so they started then having the paper and the silver and the gold currency. So anyway, there's a little bit of history, I guess, for you. I try to incorporate things of interest because this is very much a repetitious movement that I'm happy to share that movement with my ancestors. But to maintain your interests, I also like to talk a little bit about history or read old stories. Today I think I'm going to read a story from the Tlingit book that John Swanton had produced after studying and writing about the Tlingits and the myths and histories of theirs. And in my robe, I'm using the copper. So I want to look for things that say something about copper, or say something about our garments, or transformation, or maybe just the antics of the raven. Anyway, I try to bring forward those old stories that came from our ancestors and were given to the fellow there, John Reed Swanton, just to keep things going with your interest and coming back to see the progress of my robe. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me. I'm reading out of Tlingit Myths and Texts, recorded by John R. Swanton. It is published by the Smithsonian Institution, Bureau of American Ethnology, Bulletin 39, and it's story 47. The Man Fed from the Sky. Date Gase, the nephew of a chief at Chilkoot, used to lie all the time bundled up in a corner made by the retaining timbers. When everybody else was in bed, he would rise and go to the fire. Then he would gather the coals into a heap in order to warm his blanket over them. The people of that town were starving, so Date Gase would say, as he held his blanket over the coals, "Would that a piece of dried halibut fall upon this from the smoke hole?" He did this every night. One time, as he was standing over the fire without holding his blanket out, someone called to him, "Date Gase, stretch out your blanket once more." So he stretched it out and held it there for some time, thinking, "Who is that calling me?" By and by he heard the voice again, "Date Gase, stretch it out further." So though he could not see who was speaking, he stretched it out far. Then half of a salmon fell upon his blanket. He took this, cut it into small pieces, and distributed them among a number of empty boxes that were in the house. At once, all of these boxes were full of salmon. The uncle of Degase had two wives, the younger of whom was very good to him. Although they had to be sparing with their food, when they were eating salmon, she always put a little piece aside for him. The next evening, after he had eaten his morsel of food and was lying down, he was called once more by the voice. "Stretch your blanket out again." He ran quickly to the smoke hole and spread out his blanket under it, but nothing came down. So he said, "I think I will wish for something. I wish that some grease would come down to eat with the salmon." And suddenly a sack of grease fell upon his blanket, knocked it away, and dropped upon the fireplace. He ran with this to the empty grease boxes and put a spoonful in each, upon which all were immediately filled with grease. Once more the voice called him. "Degase, stretch your blanket out again." He did so, wishing for a sack of berries, and an animal's stomach filled with them dropped down at once. This time he held his blanket very firmly so that it would not be carried out of his fingers. He put a spoonful of berries into each empty berry box, and they were all filled. After that he sat down thinking that he would not be summoned again, but once more the voice came, this time very loudly, "Degase, stretch out your blanket." So he stretched it out, and there came down upon it a sack of cranberries preserved in grease. He put a spoonful into each empty box as before and filled them. Again came the voice, "Degase, stretch out your blanket." And then there came down a piece of venison, dried with the fat on. And when he had cut it into many small pieces and distributed these among the boxes, they were at once filled. It was now very late, but the voice called him once more, "Degase, stretch out your blanket again." Then there came a cake of dried soapberries, which he broke into little pieces, distributed among the boxes, and made those full also. Next morning the chief's house were crowded with hungry people begging for food, and all that the chief could give them was a little tobacco to chew. He had nothing even for himself. Seeing this, the people began to go out. But Degase said to his uncle, "Why are you all going out without having had anything to eat?" He was a very quiet fellow who seldom said anything, and so when he spoke out like this, his uncle became very angry with him. "Why do you want those people to stay?" he said. "What will you give them to eat? If you have so much to say, why don't you feed them?" "Well," answered Degase, "I will feed them." His uncle looked at him in surprise. He had seen him acting strangely at night, and had wondered what he was doing. And while they were talking, the younger wife of his uncle kept looking at him and shaking his head, because she was afraid that her husband would become very angry at him. His uncle thought that the boy was only talking, so he said, "Feed them then." The boy said, "Call them all in and I will feed them." Half of the people had already gone out, but some stood listening to him as he talked with his uncle, and one of them, who stood near the door, called those that had gone out to return. When the people were all in, Degase went to the place where the salmon used to be packed away, and his uncle thought to himself, "That fellow is going back there to those empty boxes." When he returned with one of them, however, it looked very heavy, and presently he handed out a salmon to every boy in the room, telling him to roast it at the fire, so his uncle had nothing more to say. Next, Degase told some of the boys to get trays, and after he had filled them, he set them down before the people, telling them to keep quiet. He went back again to the place where the boxes were and called for help. Two more boys went back there and brought forward a box of oil to eat with their salmon. After they had eaten these things, he called the boys to go back with him again, and they brought out a box of venison. His uncle was very quiet while this was all going on, and his uncle and his younger wife felt very proud. Next, Degase had them bring out a box of berries, preserved in grease, which he passed around in large dishes. The chief began to think that his nephew was giving too much at a time of famine, but he could say nothing. Then preserved high bush cranberries were served to the people in large dishes, and finally soap berries were all which all the boys stirred. After this feast, everyone left the house, but they soon came back, one by one, to buy food. But they had plenty of other property. People that were dying of starvation were strengthened by the food he gave them. For one large moose hide, he would give 2 salmon. He asked his uncle's younger wife to receive the goods that he was getting in exchange. But after he had obtained a great deal of property, more than half of the food was still left. The chief, his uncle, was quite old at that time, both of his wives being much younger. He felt very well disposed towards his nephew, to think that he had been so liberal and had kept up his uncle's name. So he said to him, "You have done well to me and to my village people. Had it been another young fellow, he would have hidden the food, but instead you have brought my village people and myself to life. Now take your choice between my wives. Take whichever you want." The young man did not answer at once, but the younger wife knew that he would choose her, because the elder wife hated him. Finally he said, "I will take the young woman, for she has been good to me." Then his uncle moved to one side and let his nephew take his place. He became exceedingly wealthy and was very good to the people of his village and to his uncle.